Aesop tells fables, and one of his well-known fables is about a young boy who was a shepherd boy up on a hill watching over some sheep. And most of us have heard this story, but at one point, the boy, whether he was bored or whatever it was, just cried out or sang out, as Aesop's fable says, sang out, "There's a wolf, wolf, wolf." And of course, the villagers, we know, come running up the hill to try to drive away the wolf to protect the sheep. They get up there, and the little boy starts laughing. He's laughing because they ran up and there was no wolf, and so the villagers go back down the hill a little bit frustrated. Not long after that, he's sitting there and he cries out, "Wolf, wolf, wolf," and they come running up the hill again to his laughter, and he says there's no wolf. They see that there's no wolf, there's no danger, and they go back down the hill, and he laughs as they go back down the hill, grumbling and frustrated all over again. And then not long after that in the fable, a real wolf arrives, and the boy cries out, "Wolf, there's a wolf, there's a wolf," and nobody comes. And later on, the villagers say, "You know what, the young boy never actually came back down the mountain. We need to go figure out what's going on." They go back up the hill to find the young boy crying and weeping, and they say, "What's wrong?" And he says, "A wolf came and scattered the sheep, and I called out wolf, and none of you showed up." And they say, "Well, nobody believes a liar even when he's telling the truth." No one believes a liar even when they're telling the truth. I want to read you a scripture in Isaiah chapter 56 that made me think of this story of the boy who cried wolf, but this is a much different picture, a much different idea of it. Isaiah 56, starting in verse 10, says, "The leaders of my people, the Lord's watchmen, his shepherds, they are blind and ignorant. They are like silent watchdogs that give no warning when danger comes. They love to lie around sleeping and dreaming like greedy dogs. They are never satisfied. They're ignorant shepherds, all following their own path and intent on personal gain." Let's go back to verse 10 for just a second. It says, they are like silent watchdogs. The people that are supposed to be watching out for the sheep, the watchmen, the shepherds, are like silent watchdogs. Another translation might say mute watchdogs who give no warning when danger comes. It says they lie around sleeping and dreaming. We're in a series called The Church Awake because there are things that we can't be sleeping through. We have to be alert. We have to be awake. And today, we're going to cry wolf. And it's not because there is none. It's because there is danger. And the danger for us as a church, the danger for any of us in leadership, the danger for parents would be if we see danger coming and we don't say anything. So today, we're crying wolf. We're crying wolf, and there's a reason for it. It's one thing to cry wolf repeatedly when there is none, but we cannot be sleeping and dreaming when danger comes. Last couple of weeks, we've been talking about identity. Genesis 1:27 says, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. We talked about how that means that you and I, every person you encounter, has the image of God. We are image bearers because we've been created by God. You are a work of his hands, and because of that, you have value and dignity and worth. And you are deserving of respect and honor, and everybody you encounter is the same. So we talked about how that applies in the womb, that God has designed us in the womb. He's created us. He is knitting us together in the womb, and how that identity changes the way we view life from the very beginning, from the foundation, from the moment of conception, how we view it differently. We have to have that understanding of personhood, of identity at conception, how God is forming us. And then last week we talked about how that impacts race and how we see other people. That we see the identity of God, the image of God, the imago Dei in everybody we encounter, in every human we encounter. And there's no room for any kind of prejudice on any level because we see that imago Dei in people. That identity matters. And just a reminder that no matter what anybody has ever said to you, no matter what anybody's told you, that none of you are an accident. If you feel like you're an accident, I want to remind you today that you're not an accident. As we talk about the stuff we're dealing with today, I want to remind you, you were created by God. You were created in the image of God. And every single one of us in the room was created by God in the image of God, and we were created just as Genesis 1:27 says, male or female. Today we're talking about gender. We're talking about identity. We're talking about some of these things, and this is critical that we understand where the wolves are. If you have kids, you have nieces, nephews, you hope to have kids down the road. You have anybody that you care about, grandkids, you have anybody in the next generation that you're caring for, that you're investing in, that you're pouring into, that you're praying for. Even if you don't have children of your own or grandchildren of your own. If you have people in the future, then I need you to understand that the enemy is attacking this next generation in the area of sexuality, in the area of identity. And we talked about this from the very beginning of this series. Leaders, these evil leaders like Mao Zedong and Lenin and Mussolini all said something to the effect of this: give me the children and I've got them for life. We talked about how worldview is established and developed from about 15 to 18 months all the way through the teen years, and particularly the early teen years that worldview is developed. So this is why there's such a huge push for people in the secular worldview ideology to go after kids. And some people think, well, you're just overstating it. You're just overstating. I've had some people actually recently that have said, you know what, I think this is just maybe you're crying wolf, essentially is what they're saying. You're just crying wolf, and it's not really as bad as what you're saying. People aren't really going after the kids the way you're talking about. And here's what I want to say is, you don't have to listen to me. You can let them tell you. We have a video I want to show you. It's a well-done video. It's a musical video. It's catchy. It's all these kinds of things. But they're going to tell you with their own mouth exactly what their goal is. Watch this video.
You think we're sinful? You fight against our rights. You say we all lead lives you can't respect. But you're just frightened. You think that we'll corrupt your kids if our agenda goes unchecked. Funny, just this once, you're correct. We'll convert your children. Happens bit by bit, quietly and subtly, and you will barely notice it. We're coming for them. We're coming for your children. We're coming for them. We're coming for them. We're coming for your children. We're coming for them.
Is that clear enough? There are people that are going for your children in their own words. There's an entire worldview and agenda that is coming for our kids. There are wolves coming for our sheep. Now listen to me. We love everybody. Guess what? Even those people right there, we can still love them because they were created in the image of God, whether they understand it or know it or not. We will love everybody, but we have to be awake and understand that danger is coming, that danger is pursuing our children, danger is coming for our sheep, and it's in their own words. Again, we're not making stuff up. You wonder why the fight for children is so important, the fight for their hearts and the fight for their minds is so important. Jesus said in John chapter 10, verse 10, he says, the thief comes to steal, to kill, and to destroy. A man named Peter Kraft, who's a cultural apologist, essentially, he says this, he says, why do people, when it comes to this, he says, why do people want to change their gender? He says, because the devil hates them and hates their happiness. So he confuses them by making them hate something good, something God designed and made, something natural, their bodies. The devil hates everything natural because God created it. So the devil always loves to pervert natural things. Throughout this whole series, we've been talking about how the devil is perverting natural things. What God designed, what God intended, that's his goal. It says the devil loves that for the same reason he wants men to hate their masculinity and pretend to be women, and women to hate their femininity and pretend to be men. The devil loves all lies. He's the father of lies. John chapter 8 talks about that. It says he especially loves to corrupt innocence and childhood. Therefore, he loves child abuse, especially by priests who rape children's souls as well as their bodies instead of saving them, or by doctors who surgically mutilate a child's sex organs instead of psychologically healing their minds. I need you to understand that all of us, before we go any further, all of us have been lied to in a lot of different ways, and all of us have been affected by these kinds of things, by these distortions, by these corruptions of the enemy, every one of us. So we're not talking about people that are different than us in the sense that like we can't understand how they would be corrupted or anything like that. I don't want anybody in this room to think that way. And I don't want you to think, if you're dealing with anything in this area, I don't want you to think that anybody's going to look down on you in this, because all of us have been affected and touched by this. We're going to talk about this at the end. All of us have been affected and touched by the enemy who wants to steal, kill, and destroy. It might look different for you than it looks for me, than it looks for the person sitting next to you. The way we've been corrupted and the way the enemy wants to steal, kill, and destroy might look different. But listen, I need you to understand a couple things. If you struggle in this area, if you feel like maybe you're in the wrong body, like maybe God made a mistake or you're questioning God's design, if you're in here, I want you to know a couple things. Number one, you're loved by God. You're loved by God. God loves you. His love for you never changes. Even if you're like, I don't understand why God would put me in this body. I'm struggling, I'm battling, I'm fighting in these areas. I want you to know that you're loved by God. The second thing I want you to know, and I continue to remind you of this, and this is true for us, and if it's not true for you, you need to align your heart with God's word. But if this is true, you're loved not just by God, you're loved by us. We love you. We're glad you're here. We want you to be here. It's important. We believe that you should be here because all of us in different ways, like I said, have an enemy that wants to steal, to kill, and to destroy. There are wolves coming for every single one of us in our lives. And I want you to know you're loved by God. God has a plan for you. He designed you. He created you. He loves you. His love never changes, but we love you too. And our desire, the reason we talk about this stuff, is because we want to see wholeness come to your heart, to your mind, and your soul. As I was writing, I started thinking, you talk about gender-affirming care a lot. And I want you to know that we support gender-affirming care, but, because some of you guys are like, what is he saying? But not the way the world does. Not the way the world does. The world wants you to change your body to align with your very real, by the way, mental, emotional, psychological struggles that you have, not being able to align. That's not our goal, because all of those plans will never bring you wholeness. You can listen to story after story after story after story of people who've gone through that, and they say, that didn't bring wholeness to me. Our desire, we want to help you with your mental, emotional struggles to align with the reality of how God created you. Your foundational biology is critical, and to help you in the only way that will bring wholeness. We even have in our church, we even have counselors. We have a counseling center that's free for people who are part of our church family. If this is something you're struggling with, any of these things that we've been talking about over the last weeks, we have counselors that are here. We're actually going to have one that'll be by the red door at the end of the service today. She's here from our counseling center just for anybody that needs to talk. But that's our goal as a church family. That's who we are. We love you. We want to help you. And we understand that everybody's going to step into this place a little bit different. Everybody's going to step into this place a little bit broken in a little bit different ways. And we all need help. That's why we actually get to gather together and we worship together and we lift high the name of Jesus together. Not because some of us have it together and others don't. No, we get to worship alongside other people who are struggling, who are fighting, who are battling in a lot of different ways. And so we can do that. We can say, you know what, God, we're all imperfect, but we lift up and worship a perfect God who has a perfect plan and a perfect design for your life and for mine. So where do these things happen? Where do these issues happen? Where do these issues arise? I want to talk about a couple different areas. You see it very clearly. One is in the education system. That's a really quick start for many. You look at this video that we watched a second ago, and I know it was cut down. You can go watch it later, and it should scare you, by the way. But people step into the education system. That's a place where many are trying to pursue our children to indoctrinate them with secular ideology. Some schools, if you've heard about pronouns, some schools are saying we need to ask kids what their pronouns are and stuff like that. You hear things about transition closets where people can come in and they can change clothes without their parents knowing. They have transition closets in schools and they keep things away from parents. A lot of books that's going on right now that people are reading excerpts from books that are in elementary schools, middle schools, high schools that are absolutely atrocious. I actually watched one this week, and I was like, wait a second, I think I know where that's at. And it was in my school district that I grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah. A lady reading a book saying, this is in our library, our school libraries. Now you might say, well, kids are going to find it. That's one thing for kids to find something. It's another thing for kids to be handed something by an adult. It's a completely different issue. It's in our education system. Matthew chapter 18 says, the disciples came to Jesus saying, "Who is greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" And calling to him a child, Jesus put him in the midst of them and said, "Truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. But whoever," listen to this, "but whoever causes these little ones, one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone fastened around his neck and be drowned into the depths of the sea. Woe to the world because of the things that cause people to stumble. Such things must come, but woe to the person through whom they come." We have to protect our children. We have to be wise in how we do it. I want you to know this. There's a lot of craziness in our world. There's a lot of craziness even in the education system and people within that system, but that's true in really every space. It's in our medical system. We're going to talk about that in just a second, but I want you to know that I'm thankful for incredible, godly people that are in our education system. We have some people in our church family who are part of the education system, godly people who love God, love people, are investing in people the right way. I want you to know that there are people in our education system that do love God and are pushing people and encouraging people in the right ways, and you need to pray for them. We need to be a church family that's going to pray for them. I'm thankful for those kind of people. Another area is in our media. Just within the last year, I think, year and a half, Good Morning America had an 11-year-old drag kid on. It was really interesting because I heard about it and I was like, no way. And I go and I look at it and I watch Michael Strahan introduce this drag kid who comes out, an 11-year-old boy dressed up as a girl who walks out and looks sexualized in every way and starts doing things that are crazy. And I watch the applause of all the adults in the room, the smiles and the cheers and the applause. And I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. That's where our world is today. This is what's happening in our world. The last one we'll talk about for just a second is social media. If you've heard popular phrases like sex assigned at birth, gender identity, preferred pronouns, gender spectrum, cisgender, non-conforming, non-gender conforming, all these kinds of phrases, they really gain traction through social media. Those didn't come through books or anything like that. They gained traction through social media, but this is especially dangerous for our kids. And I want to point out it's especially dangerous for young girls. You look in our world today and you look at what's impacting girls, especially in the 10, 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old range. This gender identity stuff is impacting those girls at that age and that stage unlike any other demographic. And it comes through this. I've talked about this multiple times. Parents, if you have kids and you're not paying attention to what's happening with this, that's irresponsible. It's just terrible parenting. I don't know how else to say it. You could be really good in a lot of things. If you're not paying attention to what's coming in through this, it's irresponsible. And if you haven't been paying attention and you're like, I just didn't know after today, you're like, I had no idea that all this stuff was going on, then listen, I want to tell you, maybe what I would say is irresponsible in the past, you might say, well, I had an excuse because I didn't know. You have no excuse today. When you walk out of this place, you have no excuse today. Because this is dangerous. We talked about this being a Trojan horse that we're allowing in a lot of ways. We have to pay attention. Listen, I've got a phone. We have phones in our household. We know that there's ways that things can get into our house, and we're going to try to protect our kids. We're not going to keep them from everything because we can't always keep them from everything. But listen, we can pay attention to what's going on. We need to be wise. We need to be paying attention. Because I was in student ministry for so long, there was a lot of different kind of trends that would happen. There was a season when I was early on in student ministry that especially, and it always happens, especially with girls, kind of in the late elementary to early high school, that kind of range, it always happens. There's a trend that was that you'd have girls that would step into things, eating disorders like anorexia, bulimia, things like that. And I say a trend, there's a reason for it, but then there's another season where it became cutting. That there was anorexia and bulimia seemed to be the issue, that people were consistently walking in and then it was cutting, and now all of a sudden all these people pop up that they're all cutting, and you're like, I've never heard this before, and now it's all happening to them. And then about the last 10 years, it's been variations of sexuality and gender expressions and sexual expressions and things like that. I heard students start using the term pansexual and stuff, and I'm like, I have never heard that term, and then all of a sudden it starts picking up, and now everybody's pansexual is what it seems like, right? Because that's what they start talking about, and it becomes one of these trends. Well, this is now becoming the trend. Not just the sexuality stuff, but the gender identity stuff is becoming a trend, and you might say, well, that sounds terrible to say that it's really just trendy. Trust me, you go look through the history, and you look through the stats, and you look through how it works. These things come in waves, and they come together. It's always in these big waves, and like I said, a lot of times it comes through young girls. It comes through young girls. Now, here's why this is so important as we look at gender fluidity and gender transitions, and why it's so important that we understand why it happens at those ages. And it's because puberty is a really difficult time, right? Your body's changing, acne for some, braces for many, your body's changing, your voice is changing, some are changing faster than others. Everybody kind of starts to feel uncomfortable. Nobody feels good about their body. And if you're like, well, I don't know that that's true, how many of you want to go back, if you're an adult, to your puberty stage? Right? Not one of us wants to go back to that stage. It's like one of the worst seasons of life, right? It's a really difficult season of life. And nobody feels comfortable in their body. Nobody feels confident in their body. Now, you might say some feel more than others, but everybody feels like something's going on, and I don't fully understand it. It's a hard time of life to be a human being. And there are wolves that are out for your children way before that, but it has a tendency to take the deepest roots in that season of life. There's no questions about that in that season of life. Statistics show that on the low end, 80% up to 95% who struggle in that season with gender dysphoria, or in later seasons, kind of in that window of time with gender dysphoria, if they have not taken the wrong steps of gender transition therapies of any different kind, they will grow to become more content with their biological bodies. Why is that? That if they can get through that season of life where there's a lot of discomfort and they're questioning and wondering what's going on, maybe I'm in the wrong body, these kinds of things, why is it that within a few years, within about 4 years, 80 to 95% will have gotten through it? Do you want to know why? It's because their minds are still developing. Now, I've always been tall. I've always been quite a bit taller than most people I was around. And so because I was tall, everybody always looked at me and they thought I was more mature than I was. Because my body looked like this, but I wasn't necessarily more mature psychologically, emotionally, mentally. So they would look at my body and they would think things of me, and so it kind of put me in a weird spot a lot. But my mind was still developing. Our brains still develop long after we're done with puberty. Our brains are still in the process of developing. My maturity had not caught up to my body, and the same is true for nearly every child before, during, and right after puberty. Their minds are still developing. The problem is not their body, but their minds need to grow up. And if their minds have space and room to develop without these all too common, the barrage of the sexual identity stuff and treatments and the assault of the LGBTQIA+, all the things, ideology and movement, their minds will actually grow up. And we see that it's consistent. Minds have a tendency to grow up to align with the body that God gave them. Now, this is hard because there's a community. So when you're in this time and you don't feel comfortable in your body, you don't feel like you have a place, you don't feel like any of these kinds of things, like you just don't feel comfortable in any way, there's a community of people that are waving rainbow flags and colorful flags that are wanting to celebrate you and invite you in and bring you in. And so it's understandable that because there's such a community, as people are trying to find their people, their place, and their purpose, there's a whole group of people wanting to welcome them in. It's understandable that they would step in, because if you don't feel like you have a place and now there's a group that's willing to take you and accept you and bring you in, even if they're trying to indoctrinate and do these other things, it's understandable that people would step into that. We have to see the picture of what's going on. And again, where they find that community for most of them right now happens through this thing right here. Most of them. So before we move on to the end, I just want to, some people are asking, like, how can I prepare myself? How can I do these things? I want to just give you a couple of resources that are really practical. If you want to know and learn about this, they're going to come up on the screen. You can take a picture with your phone if you want. I thought, you know what, I need to be really helpful today for people that maybe you're walking in these worlds. One is called Mama Bear Apologetics. There's books, there's podcasts, there's a website. There's another one called Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters. This is an incredible book. If you want to understand what I'm talking about when it comes specifically to young girls, read that book by Abigail Schreier. Love Thy Body, I've already talked about that one by Nancy Pearcey. We Will Not Be Silenced by Erwin Lutzer, and Strange New World by Carl Trueman, which we talked about that, and Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. We talked about that the first week. These are incredible resources. If you want to look into this stuff, you want to understand it more, these are amazing resources. I would encourage you to check this out. Now, I want to come back to a really clear understanding of something that I continue to bring up week in and week out. Why does this happen? Why is this culturally moving the way it is, especially when it comes to gender transitions, gender therapy, all of that kind of stuff, or quote unquote gender affirming care? Why is this pushing forward? First, I want to tell you and help you understand that this is really a first world problem. This doesn't happen in second and third world countries. It's not that big of a deal because they're not thinking about it. They don't care about it. Nobody, like you look back through all of history, it's not like all of these people were having this mass group of people that were like, I just feel uncomfortable with my body. There's always been people, but this is a first world problem that's, again, gaining steam because of social media and a lot of other factors. Media, social media, now what's happening through our education system as a result of it. But why does this happen? I told you for the same reason abortion is so popular, because it is a money-making machine. Just a few months ago, maybe a little over a month ago, there was a report of some videos that surfaced of Vanderbilt University a few years ago. A teacher in their medical school, their transgender health center, was giving a lecture to the people, to the doctors and the medical people in their school. And here's what she said. She said, gender surgeries are big money makers. This was her justification. She said top surgery, and I won't get into all the details of that. She said top surgery will bring in, that's her term, will bring in about $40,000 for the hospital. Bottom surgeries, about $100,000. Hormone therapies, she said this, thousands of dollars because of all the follow-up visits and labs. Then she said entire clinics are funded just by their bottom surgeries. And again, I'm not going to get into the details of that. It is disgusting. It is gross. It is unbelievable. She said entire clinics are funded just by that. That's how much money these things make. Another lady who's a part of it says this to the doctors and nurses. She says, if you have conscientious objections because of your religious beliefs, that is problematic and there will be consequences. And then she essentially said, you shouldn't work here. You shouldn't be a doctor here if you have religious objections or conscientious objections of any kind. It's a money-making machine. Whether it's surgery or hormones, puberty blockers, all of this kind of stuff, it makes money. So that's why, if you wonder, why does this happen? Why is this gaining so much traction? Because there's a lot of dollar signs behind it. A whole lot of dollar signs. And if you want to know what does really well at motivating people, money. Money works. Money motivates people. The NHS, the National Health Service, in 2020 published, there's a lot of claims that puberty blockers are reversible and things like that. The NHS published 2 years ago and changed their previous statements that said they're reversible. Here's what they say now. They updated it to say, little is known about the long-term side effects of hormones or puberty blockers in children with gender dysphoria. It is also not known whether hormone blockers affect the development of the teenage brain or children's bones. Basically, the reason they said that is because the evidence now says that it affects their brain development and affects their bones. So you have children in middle school and high school who are stepping into school with osteoporosis because of their bone mass density. It's not developing the way it should because of the hormone blockers and because of these cross-gender or cross-sex hormones. These kinds of things are incredibly crazy. It's known to impair brain development that will not be fixed once you're off puberty blockers. It's not a pause button. Some of these hormones as well, like Lupron, are known to be forms of chemical castration that they use on pedophiles and sex offenders. That's legitimately what they use on pedophiles and sex offenders for chemical castration, and that's what we're using on children. It's crazy to think that these are just experiments. And we're experimenting on our kids. Our kids are the lab rats in our country and in our world. And I want to clarify something real quick. If a full-grown, I just want to say this. If a full-grown adult wants to go through with these kinds of things, I would tell you, I think it's tragic. I would say they shouldn't do it. But full-grown adults can make decisions and live with those decisions. The fact that we're doing this to kids is absolutely mind-boggling to me. That's why we cry wolf, because it's dangerous. To allow or even aid children in this is not just malpractice, not just moral malpractice, medical malpractice, it's absolute abuse. It's abuse. I'll point out as well that recent studies show that suicide rate for people who've transitioned is still around 41%. And I want to tell you, and I've said this before, I said it just a couple weeks ago, it's not because people are so mean to them. Listen, if your life is good and you're where you're supposed to be and people are mean to you and you have that contentment with who you are, you're not going to take your own life. The problem is for most of them that they've gone through all of this, they've changed their body and they look at their body and they don't feel whole and they're like, if I've done everything I can do, I've done it all medically, I've already gone through and I thought this was going to make me whole and it didn't, I have no hope. It's the hopelessness that causes this. Today I want to give you hope. Here's what statements from the new medical field sound like. It says, if you have strong and continuing feelings of identifying as a gender that is not the one you were assigned at birth and are distressed about this, there are various options available. And these are the kind of things you see on websites. These are the kind of things you see on papers, pamphlets that are handed out. There are a lot of different options available. Do you know what those options are? Here are the options they always give. Puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, surgery. Those are the options every time. Do you want to know what they don't ever put under gender-affirming care? What's never mentioned? Any form of real and psychological or mental health care. That's not one that they're trying to do, to say, you know what, your body was made the way it was intended. God did not make a mistake. You are not an accident. And if you don't feel that way in your mind psychologically, then we want to help you. And the way we want to help you is to bring you into reality of how your body was created, how God has designed you, and therefore we're going to come alongside you. Again, that's why I love that we have an incredible counseling center that is willing to walk alongside people. You have the medical field. You have other issues that I don't have time to get into, things like sports, biological males competing in girls' sports and really dominating, taking opportunities away. There's a lot of people that are starting to speak out. In 2018, Martina Navratilova, who was really a champion in the LGB community, I'll stop there, LGB community for a long time, spoke out, and now she's gotten run over by the community. Even Bruce or Caitlyn Jenner was one that spoke out and has gotten run over by the community. You've got J.K. Rowling, the writer of Harry Potter, who's getting run over, who was a supporter of the community and gets run over because she says, this is insanity, the stuff that's happening. There's a lot of people that are starting to speak out. There's a lot of detransitioners. If you're wondering what that looks like, you can look at stories over and over. There's a whole community of detransitioners that are saying this was a mistake, and there's a ton of them. I've listened to their stories, and it's heartbreaking to hear them say, I will never be the same because of what happened to me when I was a kid, when I was a young teenager. Top surgeries at 15, 16, puberty blockers, hormones, all that kind of stuff at 13. It's unreal. It's unreal, the stories. And again, I want to tell you, if you struggle or know somebody who does, I want to remind you, and you can remind them of these things. You're created by God. You are loved by God. You're created in His image. You're created male and female. It is not an accident. And we want to come alongside you. We want to help you in any way we can to see and experience God's plan and God's design for your life, because you will not find wholeness anywhere else. You will only find it inside of His design and His plan. So we're going to continue to say that. Albert Mohler says, Christians today are presented daily with horrifyingly new challenges amid a storm that seeks to destroy any semblance of our creational identity, the glorious reality of man, of being man and woman created in the imago Dei, the very image of God. The Church of Jesus Christ must stand and meet this storm of secularism with the full force of the gospel. The stakes are too grave, the fight too important. We cannot be silent, and we cannot surrender. We have to wake up. We have to be willing to cry out and say, danger's coming. The people of God have to be the ones to do that. And listen, that includes everybody. If you're in the medical field, we're pleading with you. Be one that cries out. And we understand that if you're in the education field, if you're in politics, anywhere, we need people in all of those areas that understand these realities. We're not asking you to step out of those areas. We actually are asking you to stay in those areas and to be one that cries out and speaks the truth in love, speaks the truth to power when you have a chance. We need the people of God to stand up in every space and every place God takes you for the truth of God and the truth of His Word, and we need you to do it right. We need you to do it in love, to speak His truth, that God created people in His image, male and female. Again, we all need grace. Peter Kreeft says this, continues on what he said earlier. He said, we should be compassionate toward people who want to change their gender. We cannot help them if we do not listen to them and understand them. They feel that their souls are in the wrong body, that God made a mistake, that they know who they really are more than He does. They need to find peace and unity in their identity, and the way to do that is not to attack their bodies as if their bodies were a mistake, as if their sex organs were enemies that had to be killed, but to treat their souls, their minds, and their feelings by psychiatry. He says our attitude towards transgender people should be the same as our attitude toward wounded soldiers. The church is indeed a field hospital on a battlefield. She exists for the wounded. The only qualification for membership in the church is to be wounded, and we all qualify. Again, I continue to go through this to just say, let's level the playing field here. All of us need grace. All of us are wounded. All of us qualify. We come here not because we've got everything put together, but because we know we don't. This isn't just like a well check every week for me. Amen. This isn't me just going and saying, I want to make sure that I'm all good. Great. See you next year. This is me coming together. This is us coming together saying we're all broken in different ways, but again, we're going to worship a perfect God. That's our goal. In John chapter 10, Jesus had said, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. But here's what He says around that. He says, I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out, and they will find pasture. Listen to me. If you're struggling or you feel hopeless in this area, maybe in your own life, or maybe you're dealing with this in somebody in your family or something like that, I want to tell you that you can find pasture through Jesus. You can find peace in Him. It won't be found anywhere else. He says, the thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I have come that they might have life and have it to the full. And then Jesus said, I am the good shepherd, and the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. You have a God who loves you so much that He laid down His life for you. No matter how hopeless things may seem in our world, in your life, in your family, among your loved ones, there is always hope. And it's found in Jesus. Every single time. That is the only place it's found. If you know Him, you need to declare where hope is found. You need to make sure you're telling them where hope is found. We cannot be silent. And if you're struggling today, you're fighting this personally, I want you to know it's found in Jesus. Wholeness is found in Jesus. And only Him. You can come to know Him today. You can experience that peace. You can experience that wholeness, that integrity of mind, body, and soul. It's only found in Him.